The Irish Holocaust, Ireland, 1845 to 1850. Famine, Lies versus Holocaust, Facts. GORTA MOR versus AN T-ÄAR MŌR. Read this sight and weep. Weep for the agonies and deaths of your people at the hands of genocides. The authorities who impose the curriculum, the teachers and professors who, unknowingly for the most part, funnel it into you in schools, have carefully kept you uninformed as to which British regiment or that any regiment murdered your people. Until now, that information was kept from you. You had no access to it. You do now. You can freely read this true history today on your computer screen. Truth, justice, peace. The website is also a call to action. We want basic recognition of the truth of the Irish Holocaust, the genocide of the Irish people at the hands of the British Army. Irish people do not blame the British people, nor seek reparation payments for the crimes of their government. The Irish are a proud and loyal people. We recognize that the times were much different back in 1845 and 1850 Ireland. However, we must establish the true events of history. We must seek recognition of this atrocity and record it into the annals of history. We demand and expect a full public apology from the Irish and British governments. Then and only then can we allow for those who were murdered to truly rest in peace and begin to find it in our hearts to forgive the perpetrators of the genocide. A summary of what you'll find in the Perfect Holocaust book. Ireland in 1845 to 1850 was essentially entirely owned by English landlords. Many of them lords, temporal or spiritual, in estates typically of tens of thousands of acres. Their land titles were conquest-based. On these conquest-based. On these estates, the Irish were tenants-at-will on holdings of typically 3 to 8 acres, the rent of which they paid by typically 250 to 260 days of unpaid work annually on the landlord's estate. In previous centuries, the Irish under British rule were non-persons stripped of legal personhood. As murder requires personhood, the Irish were thus legally killable by any English person at will. Education was prohibited by law. No army of English seasonal migrants produced Ireland's vast and varied food crops. Other than the landlord, support groups of Church of Ireland, Anglican clergy, his doctors, lawyers, newspapers, owners, the military and officers of police, the bureaucracy, etc. All of Ireland's agricultural production was performed by the Irish people. In and around 1845-1850, Ireland was a police state. 1,590 police stations, averaging 48 stations per county, each with 8 policemen, a separate revenue police, 1,200, castle police spies, 100, and Dublin Metropolitan Police, 1,100. Each county had one landlord-led military regiment, but Dublin, Mayo, and Limerick had 2 each, and Cork had 3. Ireland's abundant meats, livestock, and other foods, though produced by the Irish, were claimed by the landlords. Upon international failure of potato crops, Ireland's failure starting in 1845, Ireland's food producers fiercely resisted police and military efforts to remove it to the ports for export. Regular army deployments into Ireland increased to 34 regiments in 1845 and to 40 in 1850. Black 47 was the food removal's most active year. Deployment lag time explains the 1848 peak of 35.4 regiment years. More than half of Britain's Standing Army removed Ireland's food. 67 regiments of its total of 126 regiments had two brigades. For reference, this was more military force than was used during Britain's conquest of the Indian subcontinent, today's India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. On July 5, 1847, in the depths of the Irish genocide, Lord Clarendon wrote from his vice-regal lodge in Phoenix Park to Prime Minister Lord Russell. Sir Edward Blakeney says that the country is tranquil, and if it were not for the harassing duty of escorting provisions, the troops would have little to do. The London Times contemporaneously reports of increased landings of Irish food in English ports are accessible in detail online. The genocidal mass evictions and robbery of crops continued until the Land League boycott and international outrage forced England to buy out its landlords from Ireland in 1900 and 1920. The vast estates were stripped into typically 28-acre survival farms with an acre or two of the nearest bog for fuel and allocated to the Irish cultivators of the soil. So magnificent, so far above market price was that golden handshake to the departing landlord that the amortization period was set at 68.5 years. Thus, by Chris Fogarty, Father, and all of our neighbors in Roscommon and obviously rest of Ireland were paying off that old debt into the 1970s. Ireland's farmers pay semi-annual rates, taxes, and those rents. Ireland's centuries of imposed destitution ended upon the end of that rent payment. In 1932, Ireland's Fianna Fáil governed under Taoiseach Eamon de Valera withheld the annual $4 million rent to London. Britain retaliated with an embargo on Irish goods, but it faded approaching World War II. The use of massive armed force to starve Ireland belies the exculpatory famine and its sentiment Great Hunger, GORTA MOR. Genocide is accurate, but no Irish person had ever used it. It was coined post-World War II by Raphael Lemkin to educate the U.S. Congress as to Nazis' crimes against Jews. An appropriately inculpatory label was used to report events in Ireland starting in 1846. Writers David Fitzgerald et al. And the Court Examiner, now Irish Examiner, repeatedly reported it as a Holocaust. Famine to Freedom film is a recent concealment of the Holocaust and the British Army's perpetration of it. Its academic producers pretended to not recognize the grain harvesting and reaping hook sickle they excavated in Ballykilcline, Strokestown. Their potato famine film ignores the following non-potato food processors of 1845 to 1850 Ireland: 1935 grain mills, 1984 grain kilns, 555 flour mills, 948 livestock pounds, 144 tuck mills, 136 grain using breweries, and 72 distilleries, 62 threshers, though most was done by flail, 45 woolen mills, mutton and lamb, 43 windmills, butter, churning mills, sheep folds, pig markets, corn markets, bacon stores, etc. All were removed at gunpoint and exported. Hundreds of Ireland's Holocaust mass graves remain unmarked due to the fear of the royal death. With your gracious help, let us erect memorial monuments at each and every one of these known mass grave sites. The 6 existing monuments will serve as models pending a better design. Your donations are greatly appreciated to enable this.